James is going to take us through the history of the party. So I'll let you begin.
Okay, yes, so I'm James Clarke, Head of Outreach at Renew. I'm going to tell you about how Renew came about, what we've been up to, how we got to where we are, what we've achieved, and where we're going to go next. So, at the 2017 election, 4 people who didn't know one another decided to stand as pro-European independent candidates in the local constituencies where they lived. They were James Torrance in Kensington, Chris Coghlan, our founder, in Battersea, Tim Lord in Westminster, and myself in Bermondsey and Old Southwark. During the election, we found out about each other's candidacies and decided to band together loosely to give each other support, tips, and to get some extra publicity around our campaigns. Following that, over the summer, there were a lot of conversations about what to do next. Do we march? Do we campaign? Do we join one of the existing groups supporting UK in the EU? And the conclusion was that there was more to it than that. Opposing Brexit was something we all agreed on, but we coalesced around the idea that Brexit was a symptom of a broader malaise in UK politics and in Westminster, and in order to oppose that effectively, you needed a new party. That's how Renew got started. In short order, we started recruiting candidates. We got some favourable press in the FT and elsewhere. We got our website up, we got our name and our branding, and we started getting emails and phone calls quite swiftly from people who wanted to get involved. By Christmas, we had 200 approved candidates, and we started trying to activate them from there. Who are Renew people? Who are Renew candidates and supporters? So, whilst soliciting and recruiting these people, there were 3 main conversations that I had, or 3 main themes or topics that recurred. Firstly, it was disenchantment with the traditional parties and the political shambles that we find ourselves in today. Secondly, it was about the conduct of the referendum, the outcome of the referendum, the state of the Brexit talks, plus a broader discomfort with the level of political discourse in this country and the difficulty of talking about it in any sensible way. And the last thing was a desire to get involved and stand up and be counted in 2018, or however long it takes until and before it's too late. The political makeup of Renew, we're a broad church. As we said, we coalesce around opposition to Brexit. I would estimate that 40 to 50% of our people are disenchanted Labour supporters or activists, probably 15 to 20% ex-Tories, another 15 to 20 ex-Lib Dems, and then another group like myself that were not tribally loyal to one group or another, but felt activated by the referendum mostly, or often by local topics, to get involved and stand up and be counted. So, the ex-Labour people we talk to feel that they can no longer be loyal to Labour because they don't want to vote for Mr Corbyn. They feel that he's misrepresenting the Labour voters and the MPs in Parliament on the topic of Brexit, either through genuine belief or more likely through political expediency. The ex-Tories I speak to often say, I'm never going to vote Conservative again because they brought us to this horrendous place in our political history. And they feel that it's been generated by political cowardice, if you will, which has allowed an internal policy issue, that is the unreconciled Europhobic Tory MPs, to metastasize into an issue which has been foisted on the UK in the form of a referendum and precipitated a crisis. The Lib Dems feel, sadly, that politically and electorally they're probably done for a generation or so. And they're really a pragmatic, centrist bunch. Renew people are not interested in hearing that the UK electorate is fed up of experts. They don't want to hear from the left that centrism is the new extremism. They want to get back to a confident, pragmatic and respected UK that I know and remember, and get away from panicky hysteria, divisiveness and extremism that's begun to characterise the debate in the UK. So what have we done since then? We've launched our Listen to Britain tour. Various members of the party, candidates, have been going out throughout Britain. James and I we kicked off in Durham late last month. We went through Colchester, Oxford, Cambridge. We stopped off at Royal Holloway. We were yesterday in Mansfield, today with you guys, and off to Liverpool and Manchester tomorrow. It's a combination of talking to students, academics, local stakeholders, local business people, and flowering in town centres and talking to people's real issues. We ask, what are you hopeful about in the UK? What are you fearful about in the UK? What's working and what's not working? And what we're hearing, especially in places like Mansfield, which was one of the biggest leave towns in all of the UK, is that they're not interested in Brexit predominantly. They're interested in fixing the issues that were there before the referendum. They're interested in housing, jobs and health predominantly, if we take Mansfield as an example. And this shows us that the broader message of Renew, which is fixing the UK using people from outside politics, is a really resonant one. Our people have worked in the NHS, they've worked in education, they've run small businesses, they're from all different backgrounds. And they hope, as we hope, that they can bridge the gap between your increasingly careerist politicians and your once in every 5-year voters. So we're hopeful. It's a message that the appetite for this kind of new party coming from the centre, with policies based not in ideology but in evidence, the appetite for this is colossal. And we're happy and we're looking forward to travelling around the UK and learning more and growing Renew. Thank you very much.
I suppose the short answer for us is because 80% of the people who believe we should not be leaving the European Union voted last year for parties that propose exactly the opposite. Labour's manifesto is in favour of a hard Brexit, and John McDonnell come out today saying Labour is not going to argue for staying in the single market. And the Tories are obviously quite in favour of a hard Brexit. You saw the influence that the hard right MPs who wrote their letter yesterday have on Theresa May. And so if you have 80% of people who agree with the Lib Dems and the Greens on what we believe is the most significant and the most urgent and the most important issue for the country at the moment, and they are voting for parties who have a different view, then that probably suggests there's something wrong with the offering that the Lib Dems and the Greens are putting out at the moment. I personally am quite sad about that. I think life would be a lot easier if the Lib Dems were crushing it at the moment, but they're not. And we're probably almost 2 years since the referendum now, and the Lib Dems haven't progressed, and they haven't really driven the Remain vote forward. And so, given the timeline, we don't have 10, 15 years to wait for the Lib Dems to get their act together.
Sorry, your party is a centrist party, Lib Dems are a centrist party. What's the difference between you and the Lib Dems? How can you achieve something if they haven't been able to achieve that?
Well, I mean, the Lib Dems describe themselves as I think firstly there's something about the Lib Dems and their role in the coalition that make lots of people deeply unwilling to listen to them on many issues. I myself was a student union activist in 2010, and even though I was a member of the Tory party at the time, I told the students I represented to vote Lib Dem because they were the voice of students. And the Lib Dems made a fool of me on that one. So that's the way I feel personally about them. Many people feel similarly for different reasons and different histories. And I think that's a big part of it. But also, the Lib Dems have a different history internally that means that they're not quite as united around that centrist idea as they might claim to be right now. During the election campaign, Tim Farron went to Scotland and described himself as described the Lib Dems as the progressive alternative to the SNP. Annabel Mullin, my opponent in Kensington, Lib Dem candidate in Kensington, described the Lib Dems as the most pro-business party. Tim Farron went to the southwest of the former Lib Dem homeland and described himself as a Eurosceptic. And I think there is a spectrum of visions of the Lib Dems there, which is unclear to people, and many people perceive to be untrustworthy or just confusing. And I think that's partly behind why they've been unsuccessful.
So if you're a sort of singular issue party, very strongly anti-Brexit, do you expect to gain much support in an electoral system like first past the post?
We're not a single issue party. At the moment, Brexit is not the only priority, but it is the first priority. And that's because it's huge and it comes with a big deadline attached to it. If we don't deal with Brexit at some point between now and March 2019, it's going to be very, very difficult to row back from it. It's going to take at least 10 or 15 years before you convince anybody even to think about rejoining the European Union. And 15, 20 years worth of damage is a lot of damage. So we have to deal with Brexit as a matter of urgency. But the reason why we really care about Brexit is because it makes so many of the other problems that we face harder to solve. Wages, Mark Carney came out today and said wages are down by 5% compared to where they would have been had we not voted to leave the EU. That is the equivalent of everybody in this country working 3 weeks without pay. Or, I suppose many lecturers are doing that at the moment, but there aren't that many professions where people can afford to give up 3 weeks' worth of pay. 1% of economic growth, or between 1 and 2% of economic growth, which is roughly what we've lost out on since we voted to leave the European Union, is equivalent to probably £7 to £10 billion of tax revenue. That's money that could be used in education, in the NHS, in defence, all areas which are under massive budget pressures. This is all damage that's being done now, and it's going to get worse as we approach March 2019 and if we actually leave. And that makes Brexit an urgent issue in terms of dealing with healthcare, in terms of dealing with jobs and wages and everything else.
So you said you're not a single issue party. Could you explain some of your other stances on sort of domestic politics, for example?
So we have been described as centrist, and Chris Coughlin, who founded the party, described it that way very much. He wanted a centrist party. What that means to me is about understanding in great detail what are the problems that need to be addressed, and how do we build a country that can take advantage of the future. And for me, that is about combining a country that offers everybody, regardless of the wealth of their parents, everybody excellent opportunities for their future. It gives them power over their lives to take advantage of both of those opportunities, and it provides a social safety net and a safety net of public services that allows them to take a risk every now and then, and means that if they fall on hard times, if they get unlucky, it's not catastrophic. At the moment, we're moving to a world where if you suddenly find yourself unable to work, or if you suddenly fall ill, that can be catastrophic for people. And that's something that massively stresses me. But in doing so, you have to be very pragmatic about the world. You have to say, right, what are the problems, what needs addressing, and how do we solve them? And that means taking some ideas from the left, some ideas from the right. It is not the case that you can have great public services without a strong economy. But it is also not the case that you can have a strong economy while depriving public services of the funding they need and hollowing out the society that your economy depends on. And so you have to maintain a balance there, and that's, I suppose, what we are about.
Do you think it not appears like this is a party of the metropolitan elites?
Yeah, that's a risk for us. That's a problem. We were founded in London. We are still based in London. A lot of the people who share a particular set of political beliefs are concentrated in London. We do have candidates all over the country. We haven't put all of our candidates up on the website, but that's an ongoing process. But that's partly why we're doing what we're doing now, is to address some of those concerns. It's about talking about the things that actually matter to people. It'd be very easy. A lot of people say to us, actually, I met with a guy the other day who's like, what you need to do is become the London First Party. That's what you should be, because that's where all your support is going to be, blah, blah, blah. It's not the party we want to be at all. If you look at the government's economic forecasts for the regions under Brexit, London does okay. It's the great irony of Brexit is that many of the people who voted for it most heavily are the people who are going to get screwed over most hard when it comes down to it. I don't want to live in a society where London goes, well, we'll be fine, and leaves the rest of the country to go swing. I don't want to live in a country or be in a party where they say, well, there are the people who already agree with us and we're happy with those guys. And the people who don't agree with us, well, that's tough. They're chumps, they can have their own representatives. No. We want to go out and convince people and to win support everywhere. There's absolutely no reason why people shouldn't agree with us in the North East or in the South West or in the North of Scotland.
So you ran in Kensington in 2017 as an independent, and you got 393 votes, so you didn't even get your deposit back.
I did not, no.
In a constituency that is likely to be very pro-Remain. If you can't gain any support in these constituencies, how is it that you're going to gain support in sort of these pro-Leave places?
Being a party helps massively. People have an instant judgment when you're an independent, which may or may not be fair. And one of the criticisms they make is like, even if you win, even if it's a banzai result and you are the member of parliament, what do I get from that? You are one of 650, and there's not much point. So we might as well have a voice in the Conservative Party or a voice in the Labour Party to contribute to it. So being a party, that's one of the reasons why we want to run candidates everywhere. It's because then you can say, listen, give us your vote. If we get a banzai result, you can get banzai related change. But am I proud of my 393 votes? Absolutely. The Conservative pro-hard Brexit MP lost by 20 votes. I will take my 393 and, take all the credit for Labour's victory. They found 10,000 votes 10,000 voters who never voted before and convinced them to vote Labour, which was a pretty good job. But do I believe that if I hadn't run as an independent, there would be a Conservative MP in Kensington right now? Yes, I do. That was a result.
But the person that replaced the Conservative MP is Emma Dent Code, given some of her recent some of the things that have come out, her statements, her actions. Are you comfortable to be bragging about that, really?
It's not ideal, it's suboptimal. I don't agree with her politics, there's a reason I ran against her. But I think Prince Harry can cope with people being rude about him for a while. But the reality is when votes have come up in the House of Commons where somebody has been given the opportunity to cast a pro or an anti-Brexit vote, generally Emma Dent Code has voted with the anti-Brexit group. And that's been a result for us. And given the damage that Brexit is doing and will do, I think it's better to have Emma Dent Code in the House of Commons at the moment than the alternative, who spoke about 3 times as much in the House of Commons about antis, and specifically ivory, than she did about social care or education or healthcare.
Okay, one last question and then I'll let the audience go. By visiting universities, does it not seem that you're visiting people that are more likely to be pro-Remain anyway? These are the statistics that came out after the referendum were that those who voted Leave were more likely to have no formal qualifications, they're more likely to be older, and they're more likely to be in these sort of like northeastern, Midlands, West Midlands areas. By doing like a sort of universities tour, is that not, you're not letting Leave voices be heard there, are you?
Well, I think we're letting Leave voices be heard. When we were at the University of Essex, there were many Leave voices that were heard quite loudly. But I take your point. There, like, if you go to universities, there is an element of you hope to be in the warm embrace of people who, even if they don't agree with your political strategy, at least agree with some of your principles. And that's a risk. It's a balance between trying to, we are trying to build support, we are trying to recruit activists, but we are also trying to blend that with going out into areas that perhaps, other Remainers would prefer not to tread, and that is a balance that we're trying to strike. I think we're also, in the same way today we're in York, which is obviously, the high student population, it's quite possibly more Remainery area than other places that you might go, in this part of the world. But we were out, we're not just talking to students, we're trying to talk to as many people as we can. I suppose the final element of that is going to universities is a better way of actually talking to and engaging some form of concentrated group of people, which is what we need to do a lot of at the moment, as much as possible.
Okay, so talking about engaging a concentrated group of people, we've got questions from the audience. Sorry, there's if you put your hand up first, yeah, if you're back.
So the Lib Dems have 100,000 members, a huge amount of money and campaigning experience. What makes you determine new centrist party as a meme? What makes you cope with being a meme? How do you continue? How do you campaign when you're a meme?
I mean, how do you campaign? That doesn't bother me. Yeah, the Lib Dems have many advantages. They have 20% of the people who agree with them. Is launching a new political party the optimal strategy for achieving power or achieving the aims that you set out? No, because you'd hope that there would be an existing political party that can provide the platform and you can drive that towards the things that you want to achieve. But the Lib Dems have all of those advantages and are not cutting through. And because of that, we need to try something else. And it's, you're not going to get Jeremy Corbyn right now to change his mind by just asking him to, as I think 16,000 Labour members did the other day and got absolutely nothing. You're not going to get Theresa May to change her mind by asking her to, because she's dependent on the 50 votes from the European Research Group, who they're certainly not going to change their mind. So we have to try something different. I didn't wake up 2 years ago thinking, 2 years' time I'm going to be doing a new centrist party. But you take the world as you find it. And at the moment, I found it that the Lib Dems aren't getting anywhere. So I'll try something different.
I'm just going, first of all, I wish the new party the best of luck. But I'm a bit, and you've probably touched on it already this evening, but how does a new party build up enough credibility within the community to get people to back you? Even if they may agree with what you're saying, you haven't got that sort of credibility. And also the other bit is that if we have proportional representation, that might help quite a lot, but of course we haven't got it. So it's a really big drive that you have to put on to sway people's opinions and to get them on your side in the short time that you've been running. How are you going to do that?
So I think the first issue is again, it's a huge challenge for us. It's partly about doing what we're doing now, getting out, talking to people, engaging as many people as possible, and repeating that process. Hopefully we will not only, James will be back in York, but the candidates and volunteers that we have and that we're recruiting here will be out, will be campaigning, will be engaging people. And it's that process that you go through. You first encounter somebody, you might bring
encounter a party, think about them, might get to know them a bit more, and then you push on from there. We will be fighting the local elections where we can in May, which will probably be more London focused than anywhere else. But that is an ongoing process. In terms of proportional representation, we have debates about this in the office, and I always say to guys like we don't talk about it very much because when we talk about it, it feels a bit like we're complaining about the rules that we have to live by, and that's not a good look for anybody. I quite like having a local connection with an MP. I quite like expanding the level of representation that is available in the House of Commons. I would also say that while proportional representation might be really good for us today, it would have been brilliant for UKIP in the 90s and early noughties. And I'm not sure which one I prefer to have, to be honest.
Fair enough, thank you.
We'll go on the right there. Yeah.
Thank you. A way to build up credibility would be to have a big beast from another major party move across to you. Have you had any discussions with anybody who's currently in the major party who would be willing or thinking about making the move?
Not yet. The reality is we are too small, too new for anybody even to risk sitting down for a coffee with us. I think, and we're not exactly sure who that would be. When you run through the like list of big beasts who might do it, it's a pretty short list of people who you're like, yeah, they're great. But that's something we are open to. I think, we're aware that there are some things that will happen. Certainly, possibly, once that meaningful vote comes up, that might well drive a wedge amongst a bunch of Tories. The way momentum are going on, there are a lot of fantastic MPs who are under deselection threat. Like Stella Creasy is an incredible MP in Walthamstow, and Momentum seem to want to get rid of her. I have absolutely no idea why that would be. But if they do, I will sit outside her door until she wears a renewed badge.
Just want to pick up on one thing you mentioned around, I suppose, your EU strategy. So the meaningful vote you mentioned, as far as I can tell, your strategy essentially is if MPs reject the withdrawal agreement, then that would lead to pressure for another referendum, and you would consequently hope to win that referendum. But would you not recognise that that's an extremely risky strategy to a certain extent, because you're hoping that by rejecting a withdrawal agreement, that there will automatically be another referendum, and it's very possible that all it will do will lead to no agreement at all, and you've already discussed the risks and the potential damages of Brexit. And when you recognise that if you're going down a scenario which could encourage that risk, a risk that economically is even more significant than, for instance, the current transition period, that you are basically risking the very scenario that you don't want to happen. And I find that odd in a sense that you would be willing to take that risk if you are so vehemently against the economic damage you perceive to be coming from Brexit.
The scenario you paint would be very risky. I think the way in which the meaningful vote, or the withdrawal bill would be rejected, is there would be an amendment which calls for a new referendum, and that is the mechanism. I think if I were to go to MPs tomorrow and be like, hey guys, reject the withdrawal bill, and then we'll figure something out afterwards, and it will all be okay. That would be really risky. But I think when we kind of game it out, I always think I don't necessarily understand why Theresa May isn't talking about a referendum herself, because I think that gets her out of some potential pickles that she'll end up in a couple of years' time. But I don't think that's going to happen. But I think if you can create a feeling where lots of people are like, hey, if MPs are going, hey, on the one hand, public opinion has shifted, and it's now in possibly up to, is by autumn, up to 55% pro-Remain, which it might well be. And on the other hand, we do want to abide by the June 2016 referendum result. And there's this party who, if I get this wrong and Brexit goes badly, they're going to be bashing me on the head in 2022 that just looks like a decision for an MP which is just goes into the too difficult box. And the right answer to that is ask the British people again, do you want this deal or would you like to remain in the EU? And I think that's a reasonable question to ask.
I went Justin Green's constituents. How do you convince me? I voted Lib Dem to that the EU is the most important issue in order for me to leave my conservative stronghold.
So how do I convince you as a
Yeah,
Lib Dem
so-
voter?
I voted Lib Dem
Okay.
because I wanted to get out Justin Green.
Yeah.
But the people of the party, I don't think the EU is the most important issue. So how do you convince it is? It's obviously the most and her, if you think her majority's dropped from 20,000 to 1,000 to 1,500. So how would you get this last 1,500?
So there's partly not being a Lib Dem helps. There are lots of people who say, certainly in County Kensington, in Wandsworth, there are lots of people who would say, well, I would like to vote against the Tories, but I'm never going to vote Lib Dem. And so being, Renew rather than being the Lib Dems is a good starting point. But then there's also a question of, okay, what is important to you? And if you think that healthcare or schools or wages or the economy or tax levels are the most important thing, how does leaving the European Union impact that thing? How has leaving the European Union impacted schools funding or funding for the NHS? £10 million is a lot we could do, is a lot of money. We could do quite a lot with that. And that's something that happens every year. If we lose out on another 1% of GDP growth this year, that's another £7 million that we're not going to have. So that gap from next year, it's not £7 to £10 million anymore, it's 15.
So you just focus on the fact that Brexit affects every asset badly.
Yeah.
Not one in particular.
Not necessarily one in particular. There's another element. I was talking to somebody, it was on Monday actually, and he said to me, he's like, I don't necessarily care about this that much, but I'm just about to have a kid. And it struck me that that kid was going to grow up not being a European citizen.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want my kid not to be a European citizen. And that's something which is very particular to him. It's very particular to the way he looks at the world. And there are lots of ways of talking to people, convincing people on that. And it's about understanding them and understanding their position, understanding what matters to them. And that's the awful thing about Brexit is it affects everything. But that means that once you know what somebody cares about is X, you can talk about the area in which it affects them.
Do you not think, though, that people might consider your party as a sort of protest party, and they'd rather vote for a party that is more likely to actually to be able to enact change in government?
Yeah, I think that's possibly that will be something that gets written on our headstone if we don't have a blowout result. That will be something that gets written on UKIP's headstone probably in a couple of months' time. But UKIP are winning right now. I would have loved it if I didn't have to spend my political campaigning energy campaigning to save us from leaving the EU and ending up with that epitaph. But if that's my contribution, I'll take it. If that makes any sense.
To the point of the protest party versus the party that's going to be able to enact change in Parliament. We've tried that already. That's what the last 30, 40, 50, 100 years of UK politics. That's how you describe that. It strikes me that we're in a transitional period. People have had enough of voting one way or the other, or one way their whole life, or in a protest against one party for the other. It's time for a big mix-up. It's far overdue. So why not? I think people no longer want to hold their noses and vote for the party that they least hate.
But isn't that the problem of the first past the post system rather than?
It has been to date. A lot of things need to change. But the wild deviation from the centre that we've seen since the referendum is a symptom of how things are not working. So someone has to address that. If it wasn't renewed, someone else would emerge, with perhaps a different message. But either way, it's obvious that it's needed.
I've got a question, Dan.
Yeah. With all due respect to people present, do you have a sort of charismatic leader at the top who can bring about change? Somebody who can say to people, "This has been the way, but if you follow me, this is going to be the way in the future," and convincing, charismatic person at the top to drive change.
Apparently, the answer to that question is no.
Well, so the way your party is structured is you have three principles, isn't it? Why did you choose sort of like these three? Why is it a principle rather than sort of like co-leader, as it would be in the Green Party, for example?
Principal code. I mean, that was a semantic choice, and probably just because we didn't really like the phrase co-leader. I think we are a group of three. Sandra is back in London at the moment, managing the rest of the media. I think part of the reason we have adopted this structure is because if you try and build that cult the way Emmanuel Macron did very successfully around a single leader, that then becomes quite threatening to people who might want to join you later on, particularly in a parliamentary system like the one we have. And the reality is, if 5 or 10 MPs came knocking on our door in 3 months' time and said, "We'd like to join you," the answer to those MPs would probably be yes. And they themselves might be put off if they felt that they needed to sign up to a cult of personality in order to do so. I think there's also that somebody will emerge, whether it's one of us, whether it's one of the many supporters we're recruiting, whether it's somebody who's already in politics, whether it's somebody who's whether a celebrity or a businessman or something like that who wants to come over to us. Somebody will emerge.
It's key to who we are. We're not a personality cult. We're not a vanity project for a politician. Since we're people from outside of politics, it's important to be distinct from the Corbyn party or the May party or whoever it is going to be next. And I think people respond to that. Also, if you're going to be the David Miliband party, you put a target on your head for everybody who doesn't like that person. And if you're inclusive, and the whole point of you is to bring people in who are not politicians, as you're forming your party, I think it makes sense the way we did it this way. So the candidate bits, it's a work in progress even. Sorry. At the very start, we had few enough candidates who lived close enough to London that I would go and meet them face to face. We'd only vet people who had LinkedIn accounts, and those LinkedIn accounts had to check out with what school they went to, what job they had, what their networks were. You can tell a fake account fairly well from there. And then further down the line, obviously, you have online checks that you can do. Since we became better known, that's become more of a challenge. We had we think the EDF, but we're not sure who. We had certain groups infiltrating one of our fundraising events, and since we had a bit of negative press in the likes of The Sun and Breitbart, we've had an awful lot of very suspicious-looking candidate applications, but they're quite easy to identify. But to your point, weeding out the loonies, you have to do it, every day, and just be very aware if someone's been acting strangely. It will happen, but hopefully we'll be able to demonstrate that we did our best to keep it out. One of the first questions we were asking people was, do you have a criminal record? Not that that's a bar to being in Renew. And one fellow said, yeah, but it's nothing serious. We offered him a job in security. No, not true.
and the idea is that candidates can propose policy and are responsible for electing the leaders and officers and things like that. And there's I think we went for single transferable vote in the end, which probably if you vote in the student elections you'll all be gloriously familiar with. So we have a structure like that, but it is intended to, for the moment, be driven by candidates and the kind of the exec and the board. And that was partly because Chris felt very strongly. He was like, he does not want 1,500 momentum activists signing up and bringing the whole thing down, which, if you adopt quite a very broad democratic structure, is a risk when you're only, a couple of people in a pub, which we were for a while. But probably as time develops and as the party develops, that will no longer be feasible, because it's not possible to control a big organisation just out of a small group of people. And we will look to broaden that out. Even now, we're establishing, one of the things we're doing on this tour is linking up with regional activists and particularly keen, active people who want to get more involved, and giving them more authority to establish regional organisations that can be more autonomous and more away from the centre, and start their own campaign and things like that. So we're moving towards that kind of structure already.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all from us. Thank you very much for coming, and I'm sure these guys are thinking